So welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Andy Rich, and I'm the Dean of the Colin Powell School here at the City College of New York. And I want to welcome you to this service for our colleague, Richard Bernstein. I welcome you to campus, or for most of you, welcome you back to campus. Most of you, at least many of you, were Richard's students over many years at City College. And it's truly wonderful that you can be here today. We also know so many folks who can't be here wanted to be here, and it's really been an outpouring of love for Richard. Richard's passing this summer was a shock. The last time I saw Richard was on Friday, June 2nd. I remember the specific date because it was graduation day here at City College. Richard and I were walking out of the NAC building across the street together, and I asked him about his plans for the summer. He stopped walking, he looked over at me, and he said, "I have so much to do. I'll be writing all summer." And he smiled. Writing and reading, research, and the exploration of history and ideas, these were the things that made Richard smile. I wished him well, and we went in different directions. I've thought about that short interaction since his passing, mostly because of that smile. It wasn't a big smile, because right alongside the smile was the sense that Richard was carrying the weight of his work, the responsibility to bring an understanding of our nation's history to all of us on his shoulders. It was a burden that weighed him down. But it was a true smile at the thought of a summer ahead that would be spent reading, thinking, and writing. I didn't know Richard as well as many of you in this room, but this was the Richard that I did know. I can remember the precise day that I last saw Richard, but I have absolutely no idea when I first met him. I've tried to figure it out. It must have been about a dozen years ago. I had been away from City College for a few years, and I came back in 2011 to teach and to help run the college's Skadden Arps Honors Program in legal studies. Almost everybody in this room, I suspect, knows that program well because many of you are alums of it. Richard had joined the Department of Political Science as an instructor, and he almost immediately became a life force in the Skadden program. He could teach just about every course that related to law, legal history, the Constitution, and the Founding Fathers. And I think over his time here, he did just that, and frankly, a whole lot more. He was tough, he was demanding, he was rigorous. This is what I kept hearing about Richard, and he was outstanding. You learned how to write with Richard. You learned how to think. You learned how to question ideas. Richard got students ready for law school, and he got them ready for life. Last weekend, I was Googling Richard. Not a good idea. Not that you'll find anything surreptitious, but rather why Google? It takes you down rabbit holes. And there is a lot out there about his work, about his ideas, but in this rabbit hole that I got into on Google, I ended up at Rate My Professor. I should probably have never clicked on it because as a professor, I will tell you it is a thoroughly irritating website. It's where students rate their professors, just what it sounds like. But here's just a little bit of what I found for Richard. January 4th, 2018. Professor Bernstein is one of the most diligent, highly knowledgeable, and qualified professors in the political science department and at CCNY. Very helpful and understanding as well, tells it like it is, and is not afraid to call students out if they're messing around. December 30th, 2016. What a great guy. Such a passionate professor, loves his job and his students. November 22nd, 2015. Brilliant man. He would often digress from the topic at hand, but no one even cared because he was just so knowledgeable and passionate. I found him a little intimidating at first, but as the course goes on, you'll get to know him a little better, and he's a sweetheart. I don't know if he would enjoy being called a sweetheart. Definitely recommend him. January 13th, 2018. This was, now you get to rate these people on, you get to rate us 1 to 5, 5 high, 1 low. This person rated Richard a 1. Insane amount of readings and an insanely tough grader. If you love your GPA, stay away. I have a feeling he would wear that as a badge of honor. October 23rd, 2018. Sure, he comes off as grumpy, but he genuinely cares for his students. He has the best course structure. All he does is stand at the front of the classroom and lecture. So we don't have to put up with any poorly designed PowerPoints like all the other professors. And then April 26, 2015, amazing professor takes his time to help the students. If you want to learn anything about the founding period, he is your man. These reviews ring true. They're similar to all that I've heard about Richard over the years. He was passionate about history, about the law, about the founders, about books. Oh, and he possessed books. I suspect you'll hear about this, but he had more books than I think the entire rest of the political science department combined. Thousands of books. And he was passionate most of all about his students. He loved to teach and to mentor. And his passing is a huge loss for all of us and for this college. His legacy is in all of you, particularly his former students, who are going to make a big difference in our world, informed with his ideas and his expectations for you. So this afternoon, we're going to hear from some of Richard's former students. We're going to hear from Richard's faculty colleagues. We're going to hear from the person who edited Richard's many books, Nancy Toff, who is with us today from Oxford University Press. And at the end, we will hear from Richard's brother, Stephen, to whom all of us at the college extend our deepest condolences. Stephen asked me to tell everyone that he and the college will be setting up a fund to support students who share the same passions that Richard shared around studying the law, the Constitution, and the founding period. If you want to make a contribution to honor Richard, we'll invite you to make these donations to a special fund here at the college. Steve's going to say more about that, and we'll share details about how to do it. And we also have Richard's books. They're not just on display. They're only on display up here, but they're not just on display in the back. They're actually available. He would have wanted his students, his former students, to have those books as true of his friends. And what you see back there, I can't even say that it actually represents a sampling. It's just a few of the thousands of books that he had. And many of them now are, if you remember, those of you who are students, across the street in the NAC building, on bookshelves on the 4th floor hallway, where both political science and the legal studies program are. So after the service, you should feel free to take a walk over there and select some books. And then at the end of the service, we're also going to have a reception downstairs in room 250, and I hope you'll stay and join us. With that, I want to introduce the president of City College, Vince Boudreau.
It seems like another lifetime ago. I was in the political science department and doing what you do, getting up early in the morning and going to the coffee shop in my neighborhood, Starbucks, as it turns out, on the corner of 181st Street and Fort Washington. And there was a guy in the coffee shop who I would see him from time to time. Over time, you kind of develop this sense of who the coffee shop community is, who's going to be there at 6:30 and leaving at 10 to go wherever. And then I ran into Harold on the staircase at City College, and I thought, you're the guy from Starbucks. And so we started to talk in the coffee shop, which nobody did back then. And after a couple of conversations, Harold said, there's this guy, and told it, I think at the time I just started chairing the political science department. And he said, there's this guy that you gotta hire. He's a friend of mine, and he's a voracious writer, which, a voracious writer is a little different than a voracious reader. You expect readers. And he writes, he's doing this series of books on the founding fathers. It goes through Adams, like all the founding fathers. And he says, natural for City College. So my specialty is comparative politics of Southeast Asia, democracy movements and protests. And I took through my undergraduate and graduate years, exactly one class in American politics. In fact, I'd taken that one class when I started to teach the one class in American politics. And so I'm going to be honest with you. It never occurred to me that someone who was writing a series of books on the individual founding fathers would be a natural fit for our political science department at City College, especially back then. But we needed people to teach law. Richard could teach law. As Andy said, Richard could teach just about anything. And so I hired him. I hired him first as an adjunct. And as soon as we had an opportunity to bring him in full-time as an instructor, we did that. And what was astounding was, at least to my eye, this series of my colleagues in the political science department will excuse my parochialism, but these series of obscure individual biographies and the way Richard taught them and the way he approached the instruction around the founding of America took fire among the students. Students would take his first class and his second class and his third class. And the number of students through the years that have at graduation ceremonies, at award ceremonies, in conversations, when I run into them out in the world, as I ran into Joel in Washington in a restaurant while he was there with his Oregon Law School cohort, who'd have thought? They talked about Richard Bernstein. They talked about his careful mentoring, his passion for the work, the way he was able to make the law and the politics around the founding of America come alive. And you would lose track of the students who would say, if not for Richard Bernstein, my college experience wouldn't have been the same. I wouldn't be on the path that I'm on. I maybe wouldn't have succeeded here. But to a person, I never would have been pushed to work as hard as I did and to the effect that I eventually achieved without the mentoring of this man. If you walked the halls of City College at 7 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night, it can be a pretty lonely place. But if a door opened up on the 4th floor of NAC at 7:45, it was Richard going to the restroom so he can go back to his office to continue doing more work. So we owe this man a great deal. And as Andy alluded to, you look at the people in this room, the people who are slated to speak, they come from every year of his employment at the college. They come from all over the country. They come from different people that have gone on to study law, people who have gotten into academics, people who have done things that have nothing to do with political science. Imagine that. Coming to pay tribute to this man. So it was a fortunate day when we talked about Richard. I was very lucky to have hired him. And we're lucky for his presence on this campus.
Please forgive me for working from a written text. I've been taught for 50 years and I'm used to speaking extemporaneously, but I do not trust myself to do it in this case. On my first day back on campus this term, I hesitated on the 4th floor stairs of the NAC and thought, I haven't talked to Richard in a few months. I wonder what he's thinking about. And then I realized Richard would always be here in spirit, but never again in his office. So much of our relationship was mediated by books. We did eat, drink, and joke together, sometimes just Richard with my wife Deborah, and often with our mutual friend Carla when she was in town. And sometimes we broke bread at dinner with the larger NYU Law School Legal History seminar at the end of the term. But whenever we spoke, whether over a meal, by phone, email, or text, much of our talk was about the subject that consumed us both, the United States in the context of the world. Richard's area of expertise, if it can be contained at all, was the founding of the United States. He focused on the political and legal ideas associated with the founding, the role of constitutional thought, and the particular minds that the central figures of the American Revolution brought to state building. This era was not my forte. Excuse me. I had been inoculated as a young historian by the scholarship of Edmund Morgan and Leonard W. Levy against simplistic views of this country's foundations. If Morgan and Levy provided the initial vaccine, Richard Bernstein was a much-needed booster shot. I met Richard about the time he finished his remarkable, compact biography of Thomas Jefferson, but I engaged him during his work on the Founding Fathers Reconsidered, and its abridged version, his The Education of John Adams, and finally, his posthumously produced biography of Alexander Hamilton. I say engaged because Richard craved engagement and was always full of questions and arguments, as you can imagine, always full of questions as he labored on his books. We read drafts of all his work at the NYU Legal History Seminar, and Richard and I sometimes talked separately about the issues with which he grappled. He never stopped battling with these texts until he had wrangled them into shape. I know he was proud of his previous publications, but he generally wanted to talk about the manuscript on which he was working and struggling. I looked, after learning about his death, at the Oxford site to see what had happened to the Hamilton biography, and it said it was coming out in August. Checking my phone a month ago, I found a text from Richard about a year ago complaining that he was struggling with sections of the Hamilton book, and we had already read one draft of it. As everyone at City College knows, and has been brought up before, Richard also furnished his life with books. His office seemed chaos itself, yet his mind was remarkably clear. He knew the books he had around him and could lay his hand on just the one needed to make a point. And he was an unfailingly generous colleague and would occasionally call me or text me and ask me to drop by because when he found an important book on sale, he would buy an extra copy to give to me. Richard and I would occasionally ask each other whether a particular author or book was appropriate for teaching. He once asked me about a remarkably obscure African-American novelist, Sutton Griggs, whose work Richard was thinking of teaching in his African-American intellectual history. And think about that. Richard Bernstein created a course on African-American intellectual history here at City College. I don't know if it had existed before. It certainly hadn't existed the whole time I've been here. I've been here 13, almost 14 years. I dissuaded him from using Sutton Griggs. A few years later, I asked him whether he thought I should use Eric Yamamoto's new In the Shadow of Korematsu on the legacy of the Supreme Court's allowing Japanese American internment during World War II. I was teaching a course on race and ethnicity in American politics, and I wanted to do something that was important, that had to do with Asian Americans, but I wasn't sure. And so he said, give me a few days, let me look at it. And he got back to me and he said, yeah, I think we should go ahead and teach it. I still expressed concern because I thought it might be too law professory, and Richard both stunned and enlightened me with his response. He told me never to underestimate City College students. He said, adding that there were times when our students didn't do the work we required of them, but he never doubted they had the ability to do it. How could someone with that mindset not be an effective teacher here? I sent many students to Richard, and many more were recruited by the Honors Program in Legal Studies. I learned to have absolute confidence in Richard's ability and willingness to teach and mentor anyone who went to him in preparation for law school, advanced study in early American history, political and legal theory, or any combination of these disciplines. Once in seeking Richard out, I found him in the Skadden lounge surrounded by the Bernstein scholars, and boy did his buttons burst when he told me that a couple of our cohorts referred to themselves as the Bernstein scholars. They were ostensibly doing their academic work in his presence while he was reading something, but there also was an undertone discussion of the latest episodes of the Game of Thrones. I was amazed that our pre-law students felt so comfortable with him that they would talk about their rather personal interest in his presence. I also went back and looked at the Game of Thrones again because I had not been interested in it, but I wanted to know what our best and brightest saw that I had missed. For myself and for so many City College students, I mourn Richard Bernstein's passing, but I treasure the years he was among us doing his work. At an academic institution like this, there are many complex philosophies that determine what we think, what we write, and how we teach. This room right now is full of contending intellectual complexities that make a collegium a college. Yet I've begun to think that behind these complex structures, methodologies, and ideologies, there are simple moral truths that drive our actions. One day last decade, I encountered what I think was a simple and profound moral truth that drove Richard. It was early spring, and the notorious City College fire alarms and lights went off in the NAC. We left our offices, not particularly happily, in the company of over 1,000 students onto the open spaces outside the classroom complex. It was sunny and warm, and the students, though probably hard at work a few minutes earlier, reveled in the bright spring sunlight. They danced around us, laughing and teasing each other in English and in other languages. At that moment, my friend Richard Bernstein turned to me and said, "This is my America."
Hi, I'm Jen Light. I'm the director of the Honors Program in Legal Studies at the Colin Powell School. I've never needed a microphone, so I'll try not to speak too loud into it. I met Richard very early in my time at CCNY. He had been here for about a year before I came, and we worked very closely in the years that followed. But one thing that really struck me early was his enthusiasm for two things. And it struck me so much that I had been a legal aid lawyer, and I had dinner with some friends, and I said, "You would not believe how excited people are about the work they do. I met this man, he loves the Founding Fathers." Which all of you are poli-sci people, so you don't think that's weird. But to the, except for Vince. But you know, to the legal aid crew, I said, but it's so exciting. He's so excited about it, and it's so nice to be in a place where people care that much about what they're doing. And so when I do think about him, what comes to mind most prominently is his enthusiasm for his work. We all know that his enthusiasm for history and politics was limitless. He thrived on thinking and reading and writing and teaching about it. His depth of knowledge and manner of teaching made the topic come alive for his students, which brings me to the second thing he was hugely enthusiastic about, and that was our students. Richard believed in our students' abilities to do great things. He put tons of time and energy into supporting them in their efforts and also helping them believe that they could do great things. Richard spent, as has been mentioned, a lot of his time at City College. And when he was here, his door was open. And he was a good listener. Students came to him for academic guidance. They came to him for personal guidance. He debated students in a way that deepened their understanding and helped them make connections to the present that they wouldn't have made without that debate. He pushed them to elevate their writing, and he did that by what I've been told are extensive comments on people's papers and exams. But everybody thrived under Richard's tutelage. He introduced our students to outside scholars and thinkers all of the time, invited people from all over the world to come and meet with us and sit in the lounge with the students from my program. He stayed in touch with students after they graduated. He loaned them books. He gave them books. I did have to mention the books. Richard also played a trusted role for our program. He contributed countless ideas for content and programming. He taught our students at the Summer Institute. He spent time hanging out with them in the lounge, arguing about current events or past events, or just arguing. He played a huge role in their lives and educations. We're on our 15th cohort of students, so we have a lot of students that have come through the program. And after Richard died, I sent out an email to as many of them that I had emails for to tell them and to break this news to them. I heard back from so many people. I heard back from people that I hadn't heard back from since they graduated. It was lovely. the impact he had on students, on people, was remarkable. And he has left a mark that we will all carry on. I also just want to say he was a thoughtful and caring friend. I took advantage of that open door many times. I feel so lucky to have worked with him and had him in my life, and I know I speak on behalf of a lot of the faculty and staff to say that we dearly miss him. Thanks.
Richard lived for his work, he lived for his scholarship, he lived for his students, and he lived for his colleagues. I think as some have mentioned, President Boudreau in particular, he was always in his office. Oh no, actually it was Harold. So he was always in his office when I arrived in the morning, and he was still there when I left. Now, Richard was hired as a lecturer, which at City College means that technically his only official duties were to teach. And for that, he was required to teach considerably more courses than the rest of the faculty, around a 4.354 teaching load. That's what a lecturer does. And in that he excelled. We referred to Richard as a utility infielder. And for those who don't follow baseball, it's somebody who can play all infield positions, which is a highly unusual feat. He taught a wide range of courses, many of them well beyond his training. We know he taught law, and we knew he knew the framers, but he also taught Congress, he taught the judiciary, constitutional law. Harold mentioned he started a course in African-American political thought. Can you imagine political science never taught that, and he developed that. He developed all sorts of new courses, and he was always there when needed. And indeed, although he was trained in law and history rather than political science, he not only covered the key courses in American politics, but he came up with courses that the department, where we were all trained in political science, actually didn't think of coming up our own. His legion of followers among students is legendary. Some of you are here today. A lot of them couldn't come but wanted to. He spent a lot of time advising, discussing, debating, and even yelling at them. He had very high standards. His letters of recommendation usually ran 4 pages. And for the faculty, this is unusual. If you write a page and a half, this is a lot. He wrote 4 pages, and he spent considerable amount of time. And it paid off. He got his students, particularly the ones in what was then the Skadden program, into some of the top law schools in the country. And a lot of it had to do with his letters and knowing what to write. And even after his students had graduated, moved on to law school, grad school, steady jobs, whatever, they came back and they solicited advice, even years after. But although his appointment didn't require him to conduct research or engage in scholarship, the lecturers have no intellectual responsibilities beyond teaching. That's the nature of the job. Despite his unusually large teaching load, double what the rest of us had, he was one of the most productive scholars in the department. In fact, I would say he's one of the most productive scholars in the entire Colin Powell School. During his 12 years I worked with him, as you can see, he wrote about Jefferson, Hamilton, Abe Lincoln. I mean, how many people have really learned about Abe Lincoln? And when he died, he was working on a book about George Washington. He was also a great citizen of the department and the college. He eagerly volunteered to serve on committees, although, again, he wasn't required to do so. He was the legal studies advisor. He was the department advisor for our majors. And he did all this without any complaints. Every chair will tell you the biggest pain in the ass of the job is the faculty. Faculty all want to teach at a particular time on this particular day, and they have to, and they all have reasons. Richard was flexible. Richard you'd say, Richard, we really need somebody to teach Tuesday, Thursday at this time. Oh yeah, sure, no problem. And it was really just an amazing thing. And he was there when you needed him. Sometimes I would ask him to proctor my exams if I was at a conference for my midterm exam, and he readily agreed. And all it cost me was a pastrami sandwich at Sargent's Deli. Not too bad. Now, many of you have mentioned the books. The books. I don't need to mention his love, well, let's face it, his obsession with books. We estimate between his office and his home he had about 4,000 to 5,000 books, and those are the ones that we found. I'm sure we're going to find more as we go. And every day he would climb over his books into his office to reach his desk, which of course was piled high with books. While there's no way he could have actually read all of them, he actually read a lot of them, which expanded his breadth of knowledge. By the way, if any of you want to take a few hundred books with you, please do so. But you know, his love of books really extended to the culture of books, and I know a lot of you can understand this. He loved bookstores, especially the independent bookstores, and I've never really seen him happier than when he was in a bookstore finding some gem that might have been published 50 years ago that was lost, or some new thing that came out. It wasn't just the book itself. There was a intellectual, even an emotional tie he had with books. And he'd go among these troves of volumes. In many ways, he really embodied very old-fashioned values. He never called his students in class by their first names, opting instead for the more classic law school approach of referring to them with the title of Mr. or Ms., followed by their surname. He strongly believed in the teacher-student mentorship. And I'm not talking about acting as an advisor. He believed in the mentorship. And that's something we really don't see much anymore. He believed in scholarship for the sake of scholarship, not only for the sake of, you know, he would tell his students, yes, go to law school, go to grad school, get a good job, but you're here to learn. And he really believed in that. And faculty and students will miss him very much.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Valladares. I'm one of Professor Bernstein's many students. And I guess the little story that I'm going to tell, I think, mirrors a lot of the experiences that his students had, you know, with Professor Bernstein. In my case in particular, when I started at City College, I started as a biology major, right? And, you know, I was sitting in these biology classes and it just wasn't clicking. Right, it just wasn't for me, and I started to take political science classes, and I started to think maybe this is something that I want to do, and I came across the Skadden Arps Program. I applied, I got in, and that same day that I got in, I went to the pre-med office and I said, I'm gone, right? But it was scary. It was ridiculously scary, that moment of transition in my life. I was super scared. And when I started at the Skadden program, one of the first people I met was Professor Bernstein. And sitting through his lectures, I felt that I had made the right decision, and it gave me the confidence to continue in this road that I had chosen. And without that, I don't know if I would have been successful in my college career. And, you know, through the Skadden program, you know, he was always there. He was the professor that we would go to for mentorship, and I can speak for Sagar here, for Joel. You know, I think we were part of those Skadden scholars that you guys mentioned, right? I think we were always, you know, we looked to Bernstein for that support. And, you know, through that process, you know, he gave me the confidence to stay the course. And when I was applying for law school, I got waitlisted at the school that I really, really wanted to go to. And I went to Professor Bernstein, and I was kind of sad. You know, I was like, you know, this is what happened. And, you know, it's really hard for people to pronounce my name, right? Valladares. He's like, but always, Mr. Valladares. It's not a big, he's like, it's not a big deal. Let's talk about it. And he sat down with me, and he said, you know, I know someone at that school. Let me shoot him an email and let's see what happens, right? And that like act of kindness really marked me, right? Because it made me feel that there was someone in my corner at a place where, you know, I was scared, right? Just as I was scared, you know, when I started at Skadden, I was scared because I was getting waitlisted at the school I really wanted to go to. And at those 2 points in my life, he was there. And he sent that email, I got into the school. So I think I can definitively say, without Professor Bernstein, I might not be standing here talking to you guys. And when Jen reached out and said, you know, would you want to speak at his memorial? Absolutely. Because I can't think of anyone at this school that has marked my life in the way that Professor Bernstein has. So yeah, so that's a little story I wanted to share with you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Sagar Sharma, and I started Skadden the same time as Brian. And I think if you talk to any one of Professor Bernstein's students, they'll have stories upon stories upon stories to tell you about him and his nature, his character, his personality. And I thought, I'll share 2 stories with you just to show you what type of person he was towards the students and how much he cared about the students. The first was that he just knew how to normalize himself. He was a professor, wrote thousands of words. He's like he knows more than I've forgotten, but he was still relatable. Like his students still gravitated towards him, told him jokes, and one way was that he never stopped joking around. Like once you got to know him, he never stopped joking. And my first time I met him one-on-one was it was my first class I took with him, 104, and I got sick during the day. So I went to his office and say, hey, Professor Bernstein, I'm Sagar Sharma. I'm in your judiciary class. I feel sick. I need to go home. I can't make it at 2:30. And he turns around from his computer, looks at me, poker face, and he tells me, I quote, and I apologize, there's going to be a bad word, but I think he would be mad if I didn't quote him exactly. He said, you're sick, so get the fuck out of my office. And this is just me, a student, first time meeting the professor. I'm just standing in his office, deadpan shocked, with a pit in my stomach now. And then he just goes into this wide grin, and he's like, no, I'm joking, please go home, feel better. Feel better, and come back next week. And another story was, Skadden students, I think, we earned a reputation, but we like to, use our lounge. We loved our lounge. We refused to go to the library. We use our lounge, right? This is our lounge. So a couple of us were in school. This was like fall of 2014, I think. A couple were in school on a Saturday, and we got to school like around 7 p.m. and we had a paper to write. It was due in 2 days. That's how it goes. And we wanted to use the lounge, but the lounge was locked. Of course, Professor Bernstein was in his office, so we knocked on his door. We said, hey, Professor. He said, hey, guys, how you doing? I'm like, we want to use the lounge. He said, okay, I got you. He calls security, comes up with some fake story that these students are working with me on a research paper, and the servers are connected to the lounge's computers. Please open the door right now. And yeah, the security came, no questions asked. He opened the door, and that's just the type of person he was. That if you wanted to get something done, he'll get it done for you. And I remember that night, we started working around 7, finished like around 10:30. He came to us, started talking to us, and we lost track of time. And I think we finished talking around 2:30 at night, and he was just sitting with us 2:30 at night with 4 students that he had, no duty to sit next to, just talking about life, politics, sports, all the stuff. He hated sports, and we had many conversations about sports, about why. But yeah, that's the type of Professor Bernstein was. And my last email that I sent him was, I sent him an email saying that I'm going to start teaching at New York Law School with a couple of students, and I knew he went there as well as a faculty. And I sent him like maybe a 5-sentence email. He gets back to me several paragraphs, giving me advice, giving me comments, giving me, here's what you want to do, here's the best thing to do at New York Law School. And that's just the type of person he was. He wanted his students to succeed, and he was the first to say congrats and the first to pick up the phone. And he would definitely be missed. Thank you.
Hello, I am Tiffany. Professor Bernstein was remarkable. He genuinely cared about helping his students grow and succeed professionally, and I admired him for it. He devoted significant time in his position as political science advisor, pre-law advisor, in writing enthusiastic recommendation letters and line edits of papers, and he made time to engage in discussion with students often. I am grateful for his influence on my writing, for him asking me to contribute to the syllabus and class discussions in African American political thought, and for his enduring support of my professional endeavors. Most of all, I am grateful for his kindness. In honor of Professor Bernstein, I will share some memories of him that make him a remarkable professor. One of my favorite courses at City College was called Early American Political Development, taught by Professor Bernstein. I liked this course particularly for his enthusiasm about the subject and for the rich historical accounts he gave in his lectures. He was a superior lecturer. Without notes, he would talk about significant political issues and attempts at resolutions, Supreme Court decisions, or congressional acts, accounts of America's culture throughout its history, and he regularly reflected on the subject's contemporary significance in American politics. Overall, this course had a serious tone, but it was well balanced with fun. When he'd lecture about the early American founding period, he embodied the spirit of 1776. His speech was decorous, and he adopted genteel behavior. He would act out disputes between authors of the Federalist Papers and gave colorful impressions of people like John Adams. And he spoke about the American values of equality and freedom. As Professor Bernstein said, he was a ham. He loved performing for people. And to me, it was clear that Professor Bernstein was uniquely talented. His teaching style in African American political thought was distinctly different than it was in early American political development. I add that both styles were excellent. Professor Bernstein said this shift came from his preparation with his co-creator of African American political thought. There is a claim within African American political thought that is traditionally the formation and foundation of knowledge about Black people's experiences in academia falls short because it happens without Black people's input. Professor Bernstein agreed with this claim and adapted his teaching approach from lecture-style classes to discussion-based classes. Because he was a white person teaching African American political thought to class members who were predominantly people of color. So throughout the years, he started this tradition with Joel. Joel, or whoever the co-teacher was, would ask him, what is a white guy doing teaching a course like African American political thought? And it was such a great icebreaker because there was that tension, and you know, there were questions about, you know, is this his specialty, or you know, and so, sorry, I'm gonna go back to my speech because I have a time limit. Yeah, I think it was significant. He invited students to pull examples from their lives to further discuss the readings that were assigned. By having more class discussions instead of providing lectures, he was reinforcing the content through the analysis of mostly people of color. He adopted a different approach in teaching African American political thought, and it worked. Professor Bernstein and the students built a trusting relationship, and he created a comfortable environment for students to learn in. The class discussions benefited from stories about the students' experiences, and overall, the midterm and final papers were excellent. He once commented that the papers in African American political thought brought tears to his eyes because of how wonderful they were. His teaching style showed me that he genuinely cared about the students' learning outcomes and their well-being, and his teaching was exemplary. During the pandemic, when we were still conducting class over Zoom, the final class in African American political thought was a week before Professor Bernstein's birthday, which is on May 24th. The participants of the class, including the co-creator of the course, Joel Satie, and Richard's brother, Stephen Bernstein, all sang a birthday song to celebrate Professor Bernstein for his birthday. Class members gave short remarks about Professor Bernstein furthering the celebration. Watching this part of class moved me, and when I watched it last week, I cried. Overwhelmingly, the students expressed their gratitude for Professor Bernstein's support and for him believing that they would be successful as participants of the class and in their careers. Students thanked Professor Bernstein for allowing them to speak openly in class and for being themselves, and for the valuable advice he had given about postgraduate experience that they couldn't find elsewhere on campus. It brought joy to Richard's family, friends, colleagues, to witness the exchanges between Professor Bernstein and students like the Bernstein Scholars, a name for students who regularly conferred on scholarship with Richard, and with students in classes like early American political development and African American political thought. It brought me joy too, and it has been an honor to see the lasting impact of this uniquely great professor.
The City College of New York occupies a unique role in our society as an engine of upward mobility. And I will venture to say that such a reputation does not exist without people like Richard Bernstein. For me, I am, for all intents and purposes, a nerd, and I had a very unique and unlikely set of ambitions. I wanted to get a JD, I wanted to get a PhD, and I wanted to be a professor. And when I first met Professor Bernstein in the summer of 2013, those ambitions were not just tolerated, they weren't just supported, they found a home. I first was mad at him because our first assignment in the Summer Institute, I got a B+, and I was mad. My paper was lit up with comments, and I said, I'll show him. And he got the upper hand, to be honest. The first class I took with him was Early American Political Thought, along with many of my fellow former students, my former classmates. And at the end of the semester, we had this long paper, and I wanted to write about Alexander Hamilton and this notion that we talked about of fame, which, in short, I will define as a legacy of creating institutions that outlive us. And I remember just rambling on about these ideas, and he was just excited about it and wanted to support me throughout the process. And I remember having so much fun, spending all-nighters writing this paper. God, I'm choking up here. And this process ended up growing into a much longer independent study, which grew into another independent study, which started when I talked to him about the fact that there wasn't a class on African American political thought at the City College of New York, a place that has tons of students of color, tons of Black students, and we didn't have a class that validated their experience, such as African American political thought. And not only did he take that idea on board, he worked with me, we worked together to develop and co-teach this course. And I'll never forget, he also fought to make sure that I was compensated for my labor. And not only was that course a success, it became a continuing course. It became a lasting legacy that outlived the both of us. And I will never forget the influence that he's had on me. And when I walked into the NAC today, I thought, maybe they cleared out his office. Maybe all of his thousands of books are gone. And I kind of wanted to sit with the idea of his empty office and the fact that he was really gone. But when I went to his office, not only did I see his name tag right outside, I saw the door was open. And I thought, just as in life. Because my time here at CCNY was one that was marked with deep struggle, yet despite all of that, his open door was a constant. After class, before I'd go home, I'd go to his office, I'd see him there writing, and we would talk about our days, we would talk about my plans, my ambitions, we would talk about anything. And not only did that show care for me as someone who, as a young professional or as a scholar, but as a person, to the point where he oftentimes adopted the persona of my Jewish grandpa. He would look over the top of my head and he would say, "Mr. Sati, where is your hat?" And then I'd say, "Oh no, I forgot my hat, it's at home." "Oh, so now it's keeping your apartment warm." So now when the weather requires it, I never leave home without my hat. He taught me what an advocate was. He wrote what he called warp drive recommendations. We would keep in touch over the years, and sometimes I'd call him and he'd ask if my arm was broken or if I'd lost my voice because I didn't write and I didn't call, and I'm like, and I tell him that I'm doing a dual degree program in large part because of you, so like, and when I finished my PhD this past May, and I made the point to call him. I know, I'm happy I'm done too. I made the point to call him, and we had about a 5-6 minute conversation, and I told him how I wouldn't be here without his influence, how I'm planning on seeing him, late June, how I'd catch up, and I have all these questions that I'd ask him as a young budding professor. And unfortunately that didn't come to pass, and for a minute I thought that I would go through this journey without his guidance, but I remembered the many conversations we had, and at any time that I told him that things weren't going well, or that I was struggling, he would always say, "Be strong and of good courage." And that always replays in my head, be strong and of good courage. And I want to leave that with you guys as well, so thank you.
In 1933, 90 years ago, my father graduated from CCNY in what he considered the golden age of the college. When Richard Bernstein arrived here in 2011, that was surely an indicator that CCNY was enjoying another golden age. You were lucky to have him, as I was lucky to have him as an author and a friend for more than 20 years. Today, I'd like to talk about Richard's distinguished publishing career and how we forged a professional partnership that resulted in 6 books, in addition to the many other books, articles, and chapters that he published elsewhere. These were major works of scholarship, written with style and flair and informed by deep reading of the sources. Every word was painstakingly crafted. None was wasted. Most of Richard's publications before he came to OUP were co-authored or co-edited, which says something about the esteem with which his peers regarded him. He was a generous reader and colleague, a committed member of the NYU Legal History Colloquium, as you've heard, and he loyally read his colleagues' papers and presented his own work. For 2 decades, he was an editor of H-Law Online. And unlike many other scholars, he never turned down a request to peer review a proposal or manuscript. We could always count on him. Richard worked on staff at the John Jay Papers at Columbia, then was co-curator of the Constitution Bicentennial Project at the New York Public Library, and historian to the New York City and New York State Commissions on the Bicentennial of the Constitution. All these posts resulted in publications. Most notably, Are We to Be a Nation? The Making of the Constitution. Richard and I met in 1997 in the book exhibit at the American Historical Association conference in New York. I was then editorial director of Oxford's Young Adult Division. Richard was teaching at New York Law School. And he commented that there was no decent YA biography of Jefferson, and I invited him to write one. And it was as simple as that. When the manuscript arrived, we found it so brilliant and elegant that we decided to publish it first for adults. The brilliantly concise Thomas Jefferson came out in 2003. The YA version, Thomas Jefferson, The Revolution of Ideas, was published a year later. Jefferson got off to a great start with a review on the front page of the New York Times Book Review. where Gordon Wood wrote, quote, R.B. Bernstein's Thomas Jefferson may be the best short biography of the founder ever written. One could spend whole books trying to explain the body of Jefferson's thought. Indeed, many scholars have. Wisely, Bernstein has chosen to show us ideas in action. I don't think I'm giving away any trade secrets when I report that that book has sold more than 63,000 copies. It went on to win honorable mention for the Francis Tavern Book Prize and New York Law School's Otto L. Walter Distinguished Faculty Writing Prize. We licensed both French and Chinese rights. Next came The Founding Fathers Reconsidered in 2009, a study of the cohort that Richard always called the founding guys, quite often. This book, too, won raves from the critics. The Journal of American History said, quote, the Founding Fathers Reconsidered brims with insights and revelations, and the jargon-free prose is a genuine pleasure to read. The Claremont Review of Books wrote, this is a sparkling book. The endnotes alone, the product of decades of serious study and thoughtful reflection, are worth the volume's price. The book lives on in paperback as The Founding Fathers, A Very Short Introduction. It was finalist for the George Washington Book Prize, which earned us a fancy dinner at Mount Vernon, for which Richard had to rent a tuxedo, which you can see right there. But we do have photos to prove this. It was also our first joint encounter with a Supreme Court justice. I won't tell you which one, but you can guess his politics. And Richard took the great circle route around the dining room to avoid shaking this person's hand. He did have opinions. And I followed him. Several years later, thanks to Maeva Marcus, we were both invited to meet Ruth Bader Ginsburg at a New York Historical Society event, and Richard proudly presented her with a copy of The Very Short Introduction. I think we were both a little bit starstruck. Well, next in line was John Adams, whose legal mind fascinated Richard. The Education of John Adams, an intellectual biography of the second president, appeared in 2020. One reviewer wrote, in Bernstein's pages, John Adams lives and breathes in all his contradictions, glories, and misdemeanors, and the focus helps him do all that. At every point where another biographer might have been tempted to indulge in a 30-page digression on the Tripoli pirates or the economics of New England's smallhold farms, Bernstein stays his course, keeping his eye tightly trained on his hero. The story of John Adams always takes on a poignant, almost wistful tone once that spotlight becomes softer. Adams grew into wisdom, and he slowly ripened into being comfortable simply being John Adams. Bernstein handles this twilight period when most of the man's friends were long dead, and when the country he's risked everything to create was now standing on its own feet without him, with a skill that will make some readers wish he'd lingered. And finally, alas, Richard wrote Hamilton, the energetic founder, published this August. The Guardian headline was, a fast and satisfying read. The reviewer wrote, if you never read Ron Chernow's monumental 818-page biography of Alexander Hamilton, or if you just want to check the facts behind the smash hit musical inspired by Chernow's work, this slender volume is just the book for you. And that was exactly the point. But what of the man behind the books? Well, as we've heard, Richard was a scholar and a thinker through and through. He read everything, and he remembered it all. He loved used bookstores, and for a time worked in one. It was not unusual to bump into him in the basement of the Strand, because I too have thousands of books in my apartment. He also acquired many OUP books by begging. To take just one typical email exchange, Dear Nancy, please, 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 I desperately, all caps, need a copy of Gordon S. Wood's Power and Liberty, Constitutionalism in the American Revolution, which Oxford will publish on September 1. I don't ask for much. With all best wishes and intense bibliophilic neediness, Richard. Editors are psychologists, dentists, specializing in extraction, cheerleaders, short order cooks, the author's third ear, and, as the cliche has it, best friends and severest critics. We see authors at their worst and at their best, in the depths of depression and frustration, and in exaltation at finishing a manuscript or seeing a finished book. And we see all the work, all the stages in between. Richard and I went through that, every one of those stages together 6 times. His enthusiasm for his subjects was contagious, which did not mean he was uncritical. Au contraire. He had strong opinions about history and historians, and that was what made him interesting. Every fact in every book had a purpose. It wasn't there to show how much he knew. Richard was a perfectionist who cared about every word that made it onto paper. He suffered as he wrote because he never thought the manuscript was good enough. For the most part, he was a grateful author who appreciated the line editing I gave him. For example, this email exchange in response to a checklist of suggested revisions. 1, no, I don't know that you never allow that. The subject has never come up between us before. Sigh and damn. 2, sigh and damn. RBB, getting on it at a most inconvenient time, but determined to get it done within 24 hours. There's always that sardonic sign-off. So I won't lie to you, we did not always agree. Sometimes he even yelled at me because he cared so much about his books. But at the end of one particularly intense argument, he still signed off the email, Richard, glad to hear from you and looking forward to our future discussions. Our next project was to have been Thomas Jefferson, a short introduction, followed by a short biography of George Washington. He had not really started either one. There is no doubt that Richard challenged me logistically. Students, I don't know how he dealt with papers, but I can tell you that your esteemed professor was almost never on time with his manuscripts. And more importantly, he challenged me intellectually, which was much more fun. But my patience, or sometimes my resignation, was always rewarded. I will remember Richard as the scholar, the good citizen and friend that he was, the erudite reader, the craftsman, the teacher, the evangelist for his subjects, whether in the classroom or on the page. His books have become classics, as was their author. Thank you.
Hi, this is a little harder than I thought, so I brought some props. My RBG action figure. My just discovered in his office John Adams bobblehead. Whoever I give this to, I definitely do not recommend you eating the Pez gum. I don't know how many years all of this is. And I have some books for some people as well. Good evening. My name is Stephen Bernstein. I am Professor Richard Bernstein's brother. We were 6 years apart. Our sister, who started art school at age six, thoughtfully and singularly focused on painting birds. She was in between us. We all attended the same elementary school in Queens, PS 130, and we often had the same teachers. When I reached 4th grade, the demanding and iron-fisted Mrs. Rosenfeld took one look at me and said, "Your brother? He's so brilliant. Your sister, she's so talented. What can you do?" I don't remember having a credible answer at that time, nor now. He was a tough act to follow. They both were. I would like to thank everyone first for coming and being here and sharing this. I'd like to thank you, Andy, for inviting me, my family, and our friends who I see out here to join the celebration of my brother's distinguished life. We're all still somewhat in a state of shock about Rick's passing. And I realize that you, his colleagues, students, alumni, friends, are also still processing this loss with me, both individually and, of course, collectively. I hope this celebration of Richard's many accomplishments has brought us all some comfort and some badly needed closure. I would like to thank Andrew Rich for his kindness to my brother as his boss. As we learned, he could be, what was the word, cantankerous? And of course also in your support for making this event happen. When Andy and I first spoke, I had the idea to round up all of my brother's books in his home and in his office, because I knew there were many. And I wanted the books to find a good home, so Andy arranged to have them collected and distributed to students and colleagues. Mr. Rich and his staff, Ms. Charlene Darbassi, who's here, I think. Oh, yeah, hi. And Ms. Jennifer Roman, who is somewhere out, yeah. As well as some very wonderful student volunteers were instrumental in making that happen. I thank you for that. Andy spoke briefly about a scholarship fund in Richard's memory. I'll admit we haven't really worked out the details yet, but I guarantee you that we will, and we'll let everyone know about it, since many people have contacted me asking where they can make donations. And I think a scholarship fund that helps some of the same types of students that he taught over the years is a great idea. And I appreciate everyone's help here in making that happen. I would like to briefly mention the African American Political Thought course Richard developed for City College. I was involved in helping him ensure his first pandemic Zoom class continued the course's impact. And I was lucky to watch the entire course in the spring of 2020 as his students struggled in the darkest periods of their academic careers. Richard was able to get them to temporarily turn off the pandemic, focus their energy, and draw inspiration from the writings of the great African American thinkers and scholars of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. When I would witness the students' reactions to learning African American history really for the first time in their lives, the importance of this class, of this course, became clear. The curriculum needs to continue at City College. Andy, Vince, please don't let this course die with my brother. Our uncle, my father's older brother, Seymour Bernstein, whose descendants are here with us, was once, as I understand it, the oldest living alumnus of City College at one point in time, and he lived to 98. He passed away in 2018, and our family has always been very proud of him and his affiliation with City College. My brother, Professor Bernstein, was extremely proud of his time at City College. My brother's legacy is, as you've all heard today, in his many books and articles, his professional associations, his affiliations with the staff and faculty here at City College, and the countless students whose life trajectory he changed for the better. His legacy is also in the dignity in how he shared his love of history with everyone he knew. I cannot think of a better way to be remembered. thank you again for honoring Richard today. And now, I actually have your book's signed copy. I believe this says, "This is my first copy of my first book." Richard Bernstein, March 30th, 1987. Here's the tablet that you gave him. And I don't know if this is common for all professors here at City College. Thank you. Yeah, well, I think it's reasonable that Tiffany enjoy it. And this is my first hardcover copy. R.B. Bernstein, 28 May 2020, ebook 21 May 2020, The Education of John Adams. Joel? Nobody's jumped up for the Pez dispenser, huh? I was hoping, actually someone who couldn't make it here today, I was hoping to give the Pez dispenser. But if anyone wants it, it's the first 5 presidents: Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Monroe, and Madison. Thank you. He was the historian, I was not. Oh, they're all in the back. Yeah. I will force this upon one of you. And trying to think who I saw. Well, I really enjoyed the story about him telling you to get out of his office. So please accept, in his honor, this John Adams bobblehead. Thank you again.
Thank you all very much for being here, and I want to invite you downstairs. Directly below this room, we have a reception. Please come downstairs, enjoy one another, enjoy a chance to talk about Richard. And then be sure to take some books here or across the street. Thank you.